Jordan Peterson has been a major media personality since the early 2010s, speaking on matters that ranged from the gender wage gap to the foundations of belief. However, his primary focus has always been on psychology, and he's been particularly drawn to the subject of addiction. Despite the controversies, he's said some interesting things on the subject and how to overcome it. We'll be covering that and more in today's video. First up, debating Matt Dillahunty. Both Matt Dillahunty and Jordan Peterson are well known in debate communities online. Both men have been outspoken when it came to religious matters and other major issues of the times. So it made sense when in 2018 they were brought together on a stage to discuss matters that ranged from the spiritual to the moral. Jordan Peterson began his career as an assistant professor at Harvard University, where he also conducted research on alcohol and drug abuse, after attaining his doctorate in clinical psychology from McGill University. On the other hand, Matt Dillahunty holds no formal degrees and did not receive higher education. So you would think that when the topic of addiction had come up, Peterson would be completely in his element and would be able to handle any pushback from Dillahunty. But that isn't how it went down. The topic of addiction was brought up by Peterson in the context of a discussion of the spiritual and mystical significance of psychedelic drugs. Now, if you've watched Peterson's lectures before, you know he's highly interested in the effects that psychedelic drugs have on human physiology. And having a background in substance abuse, it makes sense that he'd be interested in the implications such drugs could have concerning those issues. So that's how things took a turn towards addiction, and that's where Peterson's convictions took a step forward ahead of his rationality. Next, behind the discussion. Let's get into the details of the segment in the debate that dealt with addiction. Initially, Peterson and Dillahunty were discussing the potential supernatural effects of psychedelics. As we mentioned earlier, Peterson has long been interested in the effects psychedelics have had on humanity and how they might have led to the progression of civilization. He's also considered an agnostic rather than an atheist, leaning more towards believing in the possibility of a higher power existing rather than outright denying that one could exist. That belief and his interest in psychedelics have led him to consider that these drugs might have been responsible for major moments in the histories of religious mythologies. This is, of course, not a new idea, and there are documented instances of spiritual rituals involving the use of psychedelic drugs, such as those practiced by Native Americans. However, Peterson's approach here was more in defense of the spiritual rather than one that was scientific, while Dillahunty took a more grounded stance. Dillahunty agreed that individuals partaking in psychedelics report experiences of something supernatural, but he emphasized that we couldn't know if something supernatural is occurring or if it's solely physical. He was then cut off mid-sentence by Peterson, who wished to provide what he thought was evidence to the contrary. That evidence was that it has reportedly allowed people to quit smoking. Now, you might think that that's an odd thing to bring up in defense of the spiritual, and the social science community agreed. Moving on to mysticism and psychology. The few minutes within this debate that dealt with overcoming addiction have become a joke in the social science community. It was a low point in the debate for Peterson. He has always been accused of resorting to logical fallacies, but this was one of the most obvious examples of that, when Peterson cut off Dillahunty in the middle of his statement regarding the truth of a supernatural experience. He began a 2-minute segment that would be ridiculed for years to come. He said that psychedelics have allowed people to quit smoking, as though it was confirmation of the supernatural intervening to help the individual psychedelic user. Of course, Dillahunty responded quite simply to this odd remark, saying that people are capable of stopping themselves from smoking without supernatural intervention. This is where things got even odder, as you would think Peterson simply acknowledged that he'd at the very least phrased his statement incorrectly. Instead, he simply said, "No, not really." Dillahunty was at that point just as confused at Peterson's stubborn stance as we are, so he reframed the statement as a question. JP then proceeded to elaborate, saying there were no reliable viable means of smoking cessation. He then said that a single treatment of magic mushrooms, leading to a mystical experience, has about an 85% chance of smoking cessation in individuals with an addiction, saying that that's evidence for the supernatural effects of the drug. We disagree with that on a few levels, which we'll get into. Lastly, the study and physiology. It's odd to see Peterson, who has studied the physical nature of how abuse arises, support the idea of the supernatural through such a flimsy argument that doesn't actually address the question. First of all, to suggest that smoking cessation as an addict is impossible without the use of psychedelics is dishonest, or at the very least ignorant, as it disregards decades of academic research on the subject. On top of that, Peterson himself acknowledges that there are drugs that aid in the process. Secondly, the potential for psychedelics to aid in the process of smoking cessation doesn't prove that there is any supernatural quality to them. Considering Peterson suggested that an antidepressant might have a similar effect should have made him rethink his position on this. Dillahunty put it best when he said that we can't really know for certain that an experience has some supernatural nature to psychedelics. The other problem with Peterson's position is that it's based on a study that had a few caveats. The study was done on a small sample of 15 individuals, which makes it near impossible to attain significant results. This acts as more of a pilot study to justify a larger one. The other problem is that there were follow-up studies done over the years, and the relapse times proved in line with expectations as extrapolated from other studies conducted without psychedelics. That fact renders Peterson's argument completely meritless, though there wasn't much substance to it in the first place. Other news. Firstly, Ronaldo slammed for meeting Peterson. Cristiano Ronaldo is arguably the most notable figure in soccer today. Even if you aren't a fan of the sport, you likely know his name and his face. He's a role model to many young men who love the sport around the world, and as such, he's in a peculiar position of having influence over young minds. That's why so many people have taken to social media recently to voice their disapproval of the soccer star's recent publicized meeting with Jordan Peterson. Ronaldo had posted a photo of him and Peterson in a house and said he was happy to see him and also called him his friend. Peterson in turn replied that he's rarely met someone more deserving of their good fortune than Ronaldo. It's an odd coupling, and many fans are at the very least surprised at the pair being in the same room. But a lot of people aren't just surprised, they're vocally slamming the star for associating himself with such a controversial figure that they see as spreading hatred for particular groups. Peterson has been critical of feminism and left-wing politics in the past, and it's made him unpopular with many. As of yet, Ronaldo hasn't responded to the criticisms that have been put forth online. Next, Peterson responds to Wilde's claims. As part of a promotional campaign for her new movie, Don't Worry Darling, Olivia Wilde told interviewers that one of her characters is based on Jordan Peterson, calling him an insane man that is somewhat of a pseudo-intellectual hero to the incel community. Incels are men that believe they're entitled to sexual intercourse but don't get it. Peterson surprisingly responded to these statements, poking fun at the fact that his character is being played by Chris Pine, who's considered conventionally attractive by many. He also jokingly said that he hoped that his formal public wardrobe is given the justice it deserves when Pine does show up on the screen. Of course, Peterson also had some jabs of his own to deliver, calling Wilde part of the woke, self-righteous bullies that now dominate Hollywood and that produce inane entertainment. Lastly, Peterson denies climate change. Jordan Peterson has always been a climate change skeptic, but he recently posted a video on his YouTube channel that has garnered over 1 million views. In the video, he refers to the growing body of scientific research conducted on the effects of climate change as dubious. He called the goal of stabilizing global emissions by the year 2050 preposterous. As he read from his article written for The Telegraph, which was the bulk of the video, he suggested that the proponents of this crusade against climate change are power-mad utopians ruffians that are looking to steal and destroy the energy that makes lives bearable. Experts have quickly addressed the video and called him out for being irresponsible. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think Peterson's stance was appropriate? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.